introduce themselves. I'm gonna have Kathleen go first.
Hi everyone, my name is Kathleen. I am a junior at the University of Utah. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a peer health educator through the Center for Student Wellness. I have been a peer health educator, I think this is my third year, and I'm on the harm reduction team.
All right, Anjali, do you want to go next?
Yeah, it's pronounced Anjali. No, you're good. So I'm Anjali. I'm currently a junior at University of Utah, and my pronouns are she, hers, and I'm currently pursuing a bachelor's in social work.
All right, and lastly, Johnny, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Johnny. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a kinesiology major and minoring in nutrition. And I also am on the harm reduction team, just like Kathleen at the Center for Student Wellness.
So we're so happy to have all of you here. We will have one more panelist joining us shortly. Her name is Daniela. So when she hops in, I'll have her introduce herself. But before we get started, I'd like to lay down some ground rules. The first one is just to assume best intentions. We all make mistakes, and this is a place, and this space is no different. By allowing others to make mistakes, we can learn and grow from them together. The next rule is self-care. Again, this can be a difficult topic to discuss, so please remember to take care of yourselves and feel free to walk away, stretch, take a little break. And lastly, we'd like to ensure everyone's privacy. This means that what is shared in this room will stay here. Take with you any and all education and share it with your friends, but be mindful of the personal experiences that are shared in this panel. So I'd like to get started by asking our panelists how they define wellness, and we can go in the order that you guys introduced yourselves. So if Kathleen, you want to go first.
Awesome. So I think wellness is really multifaceted, and I think in recent months, I've really been focusing on the role of community in one's wellness. So, you know that quote, like "it takes a village to like raise a child." I think it takes a village to make sure that any one individual is well. So, of course, there's things like physical wellness, emotional wellness, spiritual wellness, but there's also things like financial wellness. Like how well can you be if you have to worry about things like being sheltered or where your next meal is going to come from. So I think that's really important to think about within the context of COVID as well. I think this sort of sense of community has maybe diminished a little bit for a lot of people, and it's really important that wellness, comes from this baseline of community and taking care of each other.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think you put it beautifully.
Should I go next? Okay, cool. Definitely like to expand on Kathleen's point. I think wellness is like a pretty broad term, and a lot of my own experiences with it have been largely through like the mental health field. So that's kind of another example in which wellness is typically very whitewashed, because historically and just typically speaking, mental wellness, I guess, is not considered like, I guess, as much of a concern in a lot of like Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. So yeah, I mean, I really like the holistic approach that Kathleen brought to it. And I guess kind of speaking more in terms of personal experiences, I've noticed in terms of diet culture, like there's been this emphasis on kind of almost disguising like these very harmful kind of dieting practices as like wellness. Whereas what even, when I was growing up, like the buzzwords were like non-fat or like no trans fat or things like that. So I think it's a pretty ever evolving definition.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Johnny, would you like to go ahead and tell us how you define wellness?
Yeah, I definitely can go. And I really had to think about this question, at least how I changed over the years. And I feel like defining wellness is very complex and a growing question of like reflection of yourself. And I think of it as an example, like how was I like 5 years or 10 years younger? And like, how do I still follow like that same ideology of what wellness is as I was growing up compared to now? And ask myself like, why, if it is the same, why is it that way? Or if it isn't not the same, what has changed, and what started that change? So I feel like wellness just in I feel like for myself, it's very different. It's been a growing and self-discovery type of experience, and everyone has, a personal definition for that. And to give you like some content on me, I feel like when I ask these reflective questions, it just helps me define what wellness meant to me and how it changes with my environment. I I want to say like higher education has definitely helped me out. Good and bad life experiences has helped me, change my scope. I think like meaningful like conversations of like how I eat and like how my environment influences my wellness. It's definitely a growing and expanding definition because I definitely witnessed in my lifetime that people around me have done unhealthy behaviors and I see those consequences. So I'm always like I need to change that. I need to change myself to be someone better. So I guess like briefly I can say like about me, it's just I used to be a kid that just grew up eating, meat, and I enjoyed doing that. But now I'm like, no, I can't do that. I really like enjoying 3 or 4 meals a day, but I have to stop that because that's not how it should be. That is affecting my wellness. It's stress related, and it really doesn't give me a lot of options. As I kept growing, I feel like what I believe in wellness now is like it really carries like with you as you grow. And again, that definition keeps expanding. Like, as far as like occupationally, I try to think of like my job and how does it treat me, how uh and how flexible they are with me. I try to take meditation, I try to take naps, I try to like consider different things and add more options to my tool belt when it comes to wellness. And I try to work on myself physically, exercise, stretching, listening to music, and like it's definitely I try to have these meaningful conversations with people to understand what that is because it's always changing, and I feel like wellness is something that you grow with. So at least that's what I think.
Absolutely. You guys all gave some very thoughtful responses. And Johnny, yours in particular segues into my next question for you all. And you all briefly touched on this, but wellness definitely is multifaceted and it evolves as you grow. So, my question for you all is how has your identity influenced your definition of wellness, your well being, the way you cultivate wellness? And or other facets of wellness and well-being. And if you just want to go ahead and answer this in the same order, you can also pass if you want to as well.
Sure, thank you, Farah. I mean, I think my personal definition of wellness was heavily influenced by social media when I was maybe a little bit younger, like when I was in high school. Um, I was following a bunch of like Australian vegan models and believe it or not, people who don't necessarily have any training in things like mental health, nutrition, um, financial wellness, they're not always the greatest sources of advice that you could go to. So I think that, as I've gotten a little bit older, as I've understood like things like more systemic things, so I think before my idea of wellness was okay, wellness is a skinny white woman doing yoga on the beach and drinking a green juice, and it was this very narrow idea of what wellness was. And then as I grew up a little bit, as I learned about things like mutual aid, I was like, okay, well wellness can be protesting, wellness can be watching your neighbor's kids as they work another shift for free. Wellness can be, cooking a meal for someone. There's no way that we can sort of be well, just even as individuals, but especially as a society, without taking care of each other. So I think, yeah, my idea of what wellness is has definitely shifted from this very individual sort of, okay, it comes down to your individual choices and what you do for you, you know, so it's like, oh, you know, if you drink fresh pressed orange juice and like green tea every day and you don't eat any meat, versus like, you know, if you are aware of what's going on in your community, if you're trying to be as compassionate as you can, if you're offering aid to people who, you know, might not have access to it, I think that's what my personal definition of wellness has shifted to over the years.
Yeah, I really like the um I really like what you said. I was gonna, I guess in my own experiences, I'm kind of coming at it from being like part of like what's known as like the model minority in terms of being South Asian. So it's kind of an odd dynamic when you're put in this minority group that's seen as like second to whiteness. And even within the Asian American community, there's kind of a hierarchy that goes on. And it got a lot worse after 9/11 because there was this very intense hatred towards anybody that remotely resembled the perpetrators of those attacks. And of course, you know, with my family's luck, we happened to immigrate to this country in July of 2001. So, yikes. But the model minority, it's really a myth, if anything, but it's kind of a double edged sword because you're put in this category that you're told, like, um, kind of like I said, you're told it's like second to whiteness, which is obviously like kind of seen as this ultimate like goal to achieve. So, a lot of what I see happen with the Asian American community is this very intense desire to like assimilate in any way possible, even if it means adopting like really toxic and harmful ideologies. Just even, a lot of times it's about like other minority groups or any kind of way in which you can kind of like push somebody else down to lift yourself up. Um, so as a result, it's kind of difficult because um, at least like growing up in the household that I did, you're kind of constantly reminded of like this intense, like very large sacrifice your family made in immigrating to a new country, which is obviously like a super hard and traumatizing experience. So it's kind of seen as like whenever there are any like concerns with wellness, it's seen as like, especially when it's mental, it's like, why do you feel this way? Like you live in this first world country, you have all the opportunities in the world. Like your parents bore like this burden of taking you to this country, so like you shouldn't have any issues. And it's tough too because there's a lot of, I know it's kind of I know it's kind of portrayed as comical at times, especially in media, but like the whole like tiger parent stereotype is actually like so damaging. And it really wasn't until I got to college that I started seeing like just the effects of that type of intense pressure all the time to succeed and like no room for mistakes, no room for like failure or learning from failures even. So it's kind of intense because I think especially for like this group that's considered a model minority, no one realizes how much self-medicating goes on. Um, so I think like that's definitely part of how my own like personal identity has shaped like how I see wellness because particularly like in immigrant communities you see it as like your success, like outward success. So like a lot of times like if like an immigrant group joins like kind of a niche economy, so like for a lot of Indian Americans, that tends to be like owning hotels or convenience stores or restaurants or things like that. So that's seen as like kind of your, like you made it kind of thing. And especially if you're able to immigrate here on what's called a skilled labor visa, a lot of times like the professions that they seek, which are stereotypically doctors, engineers, or lawyers, um, it's kind of seen as like, if you have that, then like why would you ever feel like upset or sad or depressed about literally anything? So it's definitely like a pretty frustrating thing to navigate, especially within that community and within that identity.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I definitely agree with you and Kathleen's responses. The media can be quite harsh with stereotypes and it can be deceiving. And they try to push a narrative of wellness that doesn't fit for everyone because everyone's wellness is uniquely different. Johnny, did you have anything you wanted to say in regard to this question?
Yeah, so a lot with what everyone else is saying. I think it is very challenging because, you know, like I identify as like a Latino man. I'm a Peruvian. And a lot of my identity does come from my culture. And like, I'm, you know, it really taught a lot about myself and what I value, what I love to eat, and like how I treat others. And when I, you know, go out in the world, sometimes I'm, you know, stereotyped for sure. And like, I think the easiest one that I get a lot is either I'm called like Mexican or occasionally like I'm always being watched at grocery stores, and like that's that's a problem, you know. And you know, sometimes yeah, I just shrug it off, and like I know that I'm there and I'm paying stuff, and like people ask me about my culture and then they're not familiar with it, so they think of the next like country where I'm from and see if that's it or not. So I think I'm always challenged with my identity and how I should, you know, with my culture and stuff like that. And really, you know, I try to be creative with my definition because I want to expand that and modify my definition, like for my own wellness, but also include my identity and culture because that's really who I am at the end of the day. And, you know, I just try to treat people fairly, like just how they treat me. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very beautiful, Johnny. Um, a lot of us are definitely targeted for our identities. Angeli, I heard, I mean, I'm Middle Eastern, so I know what it's like, what it was like after 9/11, and I think you put it beautifully. And you and Kathleen both touched on my next question, and that is, do you see any gaps with how wellness is portrayed in media, on campuses, social media, and more? If so, how do these gaps impact you or other students?
Honestly, I think the way that wellness has been commodified, you know, like, oh, okay, well, if you buy my workout plan, then you'll be physically well. Or if you buy these, gee, I don't know, literally anything else, if you buy this face mask, like a face, like a one that goes over your full face for like skincare, not a face mask. That is a disclaimer I have to put in the era of COVID. But it's like if you buy these things you will be well, right? And I think it's just another terrible like example of how capitalism has leached into everything that we might hold sacred to ourselves, that we might value, you know, because like physical wellness doesn't always look pretty, and mental wellness doesn't always look pretty, you know. Sometimes self-care is getting yourself up and getting to the shower when you've, you know, been depressed in bed for an entire week. And that's not always something that you know looks good. It self-care is is not just all, you know, bubble baths and green smoothies and everything. I think it requires a lot of um internal reflection and, you know, like and sort of scrutinizing the things that you've been doing and seeing if they're working for you or not. So I think that's one part, you know, where you see this immense commodification of wellness. And you know, if you, oh, you can be well if you buy our yoga mat. And you know, a lot of these companies who are promoting things like wellness, you know, who do they have as their spokespeople? They have thin white women, who are, you know, most likely upper middle class. And you know, that doesn't there's a lot of people who are on social media who don't look like that. And I think that's another thing, you know, it's like when the only sort of aspects of wellness, or the only Instagram accounts that you follow that mention wellness, all of them promote it like by looking a certain way or doing a certain thing, I mean, your perception of course gets massively skewed. And I think another thing is that with college students, I think Anjali kind of touched on this, but like, you know, feeling like college was the first time where you really got this sort of taste of freedom. A lot of people don't have like self-care rituals, or they don't know how to, you know, like take care of their wellness in a bunch of different aspects. So I think in that case, it's like, okay, well, you know, of course, knowing your resources, but then also trying to find out what works for you, and what doesn't. Like wellness, again, it's a personal definition for everyone. And somebody might, you know, focus on their physical wellness, while somebody else might focus on their mental wellness or their financial wellness, things like that. So I think a lot of the times self-care and wellness and things like that sort of come in this very prescribed, like, okay, if you do XYZ, you'll be well. And you know, that sort of formula doesn't work for everybody. So I think another thing that is not emphasized enough in wellness is sort of, you know, trying to figure out what works for you, and then trying, and then failing as well, because I think that a lot of the times that isn't really portrayed as well, you know, like failing, and then doing things that end up not working out for you, and then how do you move on from that, you know. So that's those are a couple of things to do with like wellness culture that I think really need fixing.
Yeah, I really like how you brought up how much like capitalism almost like bars so many people from having any kind of access to traditional definitions of wellness. I think one thing that came to mind was this summer in particular, there was kind of this huge emphasis in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement of like basic cultural competency with anybody that tries to advocate for wellness. I think there was finally this push that really needed to happen, especially within the mental health community, of finally being like, okay, like it's tough enough to, I'm sure, to be a therapist, but like what does it mean to tell somebody, for example, to get therapy if, you know, the person that's licensed in it has literally no clue of like different cultural norms or reasons that somebody might be hesitant even to access therapy. And I actually, it's a little funny, I get a bit cynical when I see like celebrities, for example, speak out about like mental health awareness or anything like that, because I think it's definitely good. I think it's definitely good to destigmatize things like that. But I get a bit cynical because it's so easy for somebody of their socioeconomic status to be like, it's okay to reach out for help, and like help is always there. You just have to ask. When realistically, most people can't afford mental health services. And it's interesting too, because I know a lot of people who, like, when they get to college, that's the first time they have any kind of accessibility to mental health care. And like, you know, what does that, it's so much easier said than done anyways to tell someone to go get help in any way, but what does that mean when they haven't really been conditioned to think that like that help could actually be catered to them? um and also I think too, even in media, it's very, I think there's finally like changes happening with this, but it's really rare we even see like actors that are non-white playing roles of therapists. And I think like I definitely see changes happening. Like for example, there was a show called Never Have I Ever with like a South Asian lead, and there's like scenes of her in therapy, and the therapist is actually a Black woman. So like it's definitely changing. I think media is finally starting to come around in that way. Um, but I think like one thing that also came to mind was, I want to say it was like September or October, that was like Suicide Prevention Month. And you know, normally like it's so easy to like post the number to like a hotline, but again, what does that mean if, you know, the hotline could potentially get police involved if you're in like a genuine kind of mental health crisis? And there's finally this understanding now, like we're getting there, of how like police, for example, are not equipped to handle anything mental health related. Like absolutely like that should be defunded, and those kind of needs need to be allocated to people who can actually handle them. But I saw like a tweet, I think, that said something like, addressing poverty is suicide prevention, addressing financial barriers to getting any kind of healthcare, not even just mental health care, but any kind of like wellness or anything like that. Like that is also suicide prevention. It's also like a matter of like a therapist or any kind of healthcare professional like educating themselves on race and class and ways in which that kind of intersects with people's identities, because otherwise you're really not able to help anybody other than your typical like white upper middle class kind of patient. So those are definitely like a couple of things that come to mind for me in terms of how media sort of impacts like wellness definitions.
Really quick, our fourth panelist has joined us. Daniela, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I just had a class before this, but my name is Daniela. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a social work major.
All right, so the question that I previously asked was, do you see any gaps with how wellness is portrayed in media, on college campuses, social media, and more? If so, how do these gaps impact you and your peers? And you and Johnny, if you guys would like to talk about that.
So I really enjoyed, both of you guys' comments. I think it does hit right on the money. I feel like at least how we're portrayed with like the media on campus is skewed. Every time that I walk around, at least on campus, and I see advertisements, there's always a white person on there. And usually there is, a person of color, but mainly it's like, Black. I do sometimes see, some, inclusivity on campus, but majority of the times I do see someone that's just white. And it's interesting because I try to like think about all the resources that we do have on campus. It is available to us. It is there. But when you try to approach that stuff, like some of you were saying, affordability was something that's uh, that even myself, I can't always afford these things, even though if they have like a sliding scale, like sometimes I just don't have the money for that. And how can I help myself if it's, trying to get some mental health services through, through the centers from the counseling center, sorry. So I try to advocate even for myself and like for others to find this information, that sometimes it is difficult to access these resources on campus because we don't practice this stuff. We just like showing these resources, and growing up, we don't know how to use them still. And sometimes we might come from a background that doesn't even talk about mental health either. So I'm like, how can we have these healthy, meaningful conversations about this stuff? So it's definitely, I feel like it has been improving on campus. So I think we're in the right direction on how we're helping our students and getting more feedback and making action towards that. So even though there are some negatives, I do believe we're trying to make it better. And I can see that, and like, I appreciate everyone's efforts in doing that. So
I guess I'll say a couple of things too. So personally, like how Johnny mentioned, I guess the resources are there for students to like use and stuff, but they're not very well known, especially like people of color, or like when I go to like say a group, like I'm part of MECHA, and you mentioned like the counseling center. A lot of people don't know like, oh, the counseling center does this, or the Center for Student Wellness does this, or what is ACEs type of thing. Because I get a lot of questions about what ACEs is. I'm like, y'all don't know what ACEs is, and it just tells me like, oh, these resources are there, but they're not being promoted as much, or they're not reaching the targeted population, I guess. But yeah, I think wellness is like very it's there, but like I don't know, a lot of people don't know about it or don't know how to define it, or media portrays it in a way that sometimes it is not like, I don't know. I don't explain it, but yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you all for those really thoughtful responses. A lot of you touched on resources and resource accessibility. And during these unprecedented times, COVID has definitely changed the way we define wellness. And I was wondering if you think these gaps have changed since COVID. Has it been more accessible? Has it affected more marginalized communities? What are your thoughts on that?
So I guess the interesting thing about COVID is that it, you know, the timeline intersected sort of with all of these, you know, murders of Black men by police and then the subsequent protests. And I think that COVID has really exacerbated the ways in which so many, especially marginalized communities, cannot get access to things that would, increase their wellness. So, you have things like oh, okay, a lot of people are unemployed right now, right? And if they're not unemployed, then they're essential workers, and they're constantly being exposed to COVID, and then a lot of the times not even getting hazard pay. So this is like one aspect in which financial wellness is greatly impacted. Like I know that there's been a lot of talk about a second stimulus check, which I absolutely support. I think that people really need that kind of like financial support right now. Just everyone does. But that's one way that COVID has exacerbated like financial unwellness. And then another thing is like when it comes to mental wellness, I was able to speak with the director of the Black Cultural Center, Malijah Garfield, I believe, and he was talking about there's this exhaustion when it comes to like I guess being Black in this sort of landscape, and everybody trying to ask you about questions and like acting like you're their personal library or their personal, oh, okay, unload white guilt here, kind of a person. And that really takes a toll on someone. So like there's so many ways that COVID has really exacerbated issues, and when it comes to the way that like just we treat these things, being virtual is really difficult for a lot of people. I think we're meant to see others on a regular basis and interact with people, but obviously that's not possible right now. And when it comes to things like especially mental wellness, needing someone to lean on, needing someone to talk about whatever like how things have been affecting you, I mean that's really difficult to do, I guess, over Zoom or over the phone. So yeah, I mean COVID has just really shown a bright spotlight on every single part of our society that was inequitable or is violent or brutal, and all of these things. I think they're all coming to a head, and I don't really know what wellness will look like after COVID, but I'm really hoping that it doesn't return to what it was pre-COVID or even during COVID.
Yeah, I really like what you said about like how COVID really intersected with so many murders of not even just Black men but also Black women, with the whole like Breonna Taylor thing. And it's not that that was even a new issue by any means. Like this, the police literally started as like I don't want to say organization, but I guess like kind of like a bounty hunter kind of thing, to like literally like hunt down enslaved people that were trying to self-emancipate. So I mean, I don't want to say that. I mean, it's definitely never been a secret by any means, but I think this particular, I don't want to say chapter, but I guess for lack of a better word, this chapter iteration of Black Lives Matter, there's kind of finally been this understanding by non-Black people, whether you're white or just a non-Black person of color, that, oh shit, like the police are not here to protect and serve anybody except for the wealthy, and disproportionately that would be white people. And I think too, there was finally kind of, I like to think this needle is being pushed forward in this aspect of people finally understanding, hey, maybe it's not such a good idea to share, trauma porn of Black bodies just being mangled and brutalized constantly. Like that really takes a toll on anybody, but especially when the person in that video looks even remotely like you, whether or not you're Black. And I think too, one kind of expanding on Kathleen's point about capitalism, I think part of why this particular wave of activism was so strong, because there were protests when George Floyd's murder happened. There were protests in all 50 states, which has really almost never happened before. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that people were unemployed. They had a lot more time on their hands because they weren't working, and they had so much more time to actually educate themselves on ways that systemic oppression affects everybody, which is, I think, kind of a trap that a capitalist society puts people in, is that, if you're barely making enough to make ends meet as it is, you're really not going to have any time to try and like really think a lot deeper about how a capitalist economy is exploiting everybody and how people are either gaining or losing from it. So I think in that aspect, that's part of why this particular wave was so huge, is because suddenly like so many people were like, wait, like this has been happening for a while, but we finally have like the headspace to even process it and think about it and really like do the research. Because this was also definitely like the biggest kind of emphasis I've ever seen on people recommending like anti-racism literature, for example, and actually like encouraging people to, kind of like Kathleen said, like maybe not always rely on your friends of color to be your personal library or encyclopedia, or just, almost like a Wikipedia on racism in every form as it ever has existed. So I think that has also been helpful. And probably all that's coming to mind at the moment.
Johnny, Daniela, do you have a response to that question?
For me, I definitely agree with both your responses. I think it's something that we should have a conversation about, continue talking about. As far as like, I just think, COVID just exposed like the inequality that we have and how we like define wellness. And there are definitely barriers, that we're still trying to overcome and trying to improve that. But we still have a long way to go. And COVID just shows us how, I think just how like our wellness is like dramatically changed, and we have to adjust to that no matter what. So I'm hopeful for the future, just because I want everyone to be safe. I want their wellness to still maintain that consistency, so they can perform the best to their ability. So then we can work as like a community, to improve that our wellness statement. So that's all I really gotta say about it.
Well, everyone said great points, so I'll just like add a little salt into it, I guess. So I think like how everyone said, like COVID really like showed like the health disparities, like the protests and everything, the unemployment. One thing that like comes to mind is when it comes to COVID testing and how it's being approached, how there's like language barriers, there's just so many barriers when it comes to that I think about, like not everyone speaks English and maybe they don't understand what's happening or how it's being portrayed in the media. Like personally, when my mom sees the news in Spanish, they hella dramatize it and it makes my mom like panic even more. I mean, it's like normal, but like I don't know, it has a lot to do with like, I don't know, how it's being portrayed and stuff. Yeah.
Thank you all for your responses. I really do like how you mentioned the intersectionality between the pandemic and racial disparities and the advancement of the Black Lives Matter movement in all 50 states, and also just the language barriers people face in this pandemic. And my last question for all of you before I open it up to the audience is, in 2 to 3 sentences, what is something you would tell your freshman self about wellness, given the whirlwind of a year that we've all had and just your college experience?
Let's see. Tell your friends you love them. Don't worry too much about grades. There's more important things in life.
I might say not everybody is going to agree with your definition of wellness.
If I had to give advice, I would just tell myself to be patient with myself, practice in continually try to redefine my wellness, and advocate on my behalf. If I'm not happy, maybe that's in my academics or in my life, I just gotta make sure I'm okay. And kind of like Kathleen said, if the grades are failing just a little bit, but my sanity is being in question, that's a personal decision, but definitely I would choose to be happy more than have an A in the class, but that's just me. But yeah.
I think the same. I think like grades aren't everything. I mean, they are when you're like applying to like grad school, which I notice how important grades are. But to my future self, to my freshman self, I would say take it easy, focus on your wellness, try to figure out what you like to do for your wellness. I think that took me forever to like figure out what to do for self-care because I was always go, go, go.
Thank you all for your beautiful responses. I think you each said something that we can even apply to our lives today, and I think it was very insightful. And now I'd like to open up the rest of the time to our audience if they have any questions for any of the panelists. And you can unmute yourself or use the chat function too.
I have a question for all the panelists. Just wondering, like, who have been those sources of role models in your life when it comes to like growing your definition of wellness?
Is it cool if I go first? Okay, cool. Actually, Brie was the one that put me onto Jamila Jamil, like very hardcore. It's just insane to me seeing somebody like her who is of my background speaking so openly about mental health and just being like pro-choice and being very anti-racist. It's unfortunately not a thing I see very commonly in our community. There is still a lot of colorism, there's a lot of anti-Blackness, and it kind of comes with that territory of being an immigrant, and it's almost like a survival thing, is what I've recently realized, especially with our parents. They almost have to internalize like these very harmful beliefs about other minority groups in order to survive wanting to be a citizen in whatever country they immigrated to. I never realized like how much of a privilege it really is to question systems of oppression around you, because it's so much easier. This is what I've realized. It's so much easier to think that other minority groups or other marginalized groups are the problem rather than see or like take a moment to really be introspective and see like how a system screws everybody over, regardless of whether you're, you know, second to whiteness in the model minority or if you're bottom of that totem pole. So it's been really cool to see somebody of, her, I guess, level of success, because it's not like she's the only South Asian person in media or in Hollywood, but she's the only one I see personally that's actually speaking out about like colorism, which is insane because definitely like Bollywood stars have come to the US and broken into like the Hollywood market. But for example, like Priyanka Chopra still has a lot of campaigns with like skin bleaching like products. So I'd say like Jamila Jamil is definitely like the first one that comes to mind. There's definitely others, but unfortunately they're disproportionately white. So
So do you mind if I go? Or okay, all right. So where do I get my inspiration from? That's a great question. The way I look at things is mainly I look at every piece of information that is, attainable to me. I look at them, I consider them, sometimes with a grain of salt, and uh, I feel like I use all those like experiences or like things that I've read to like help me redefine my wellness. But if I had to get inspiration from a person, I I think the only one I can think of right now, I can't think of a celebrity or like a mentor at the moment, but I just feel like my father is my inspiration on like how I want to define my wellness. His upbringing was like he used to live in Peru and he immigrated here, and you can say he did the American dream if that's what you want to call it. But he really worked his like his butt off in America to be in his position, to be in the middle class, to have his own business, and he's always told me to ask questions, even if they are dumb, and keep asking those until you find the right answer to what you want, and redefine your definition depending on how you see your life at that point. And he's always been a hard worker. He's always been consistent. So I try to keep those like characteristics of him into myself to continually find that answer. So I think that's my inspiration.
I would like to provide a really quick answer, if that's all right. I think the first person, like when it came to college, who really opened and broadened my perspective of wellness was one of my professors, and his name is Philip Bimstein, and he is the coolest professor of all time, and he teaches this class called kindness. And I was really intrigued by that. And, this entire course, the semester long course, was we were meditating, we were reading books on, what it truly means to be altruistic and kind. And that was sort of my first exposure to someone who was living this very beautiful life, this kind of life that I wanted to emulate, somebody who was just very full of kindness and joy, and had so many friends and had such an open mind, and created beautiful things. So I think that was sort of my first introduction to wellness. And then of course I got involved with the Center for Student Wellness, and that went down as history. I'm just kidding. But yeah, no, like being able to work on these events, being able to like speak on panels like this, give presentations, those all really broadened my perspective of wellness. So I think that everybody in the Center for Student Wellness that I've been able to work with over the past couple of years has really just been an inspiration to me. Has been, people have been people I really look up to, and people I really trust when it comes to talking about all aspects of wellness. People, who are gracious and kind, and are willing to listen even if they can't necessarily understand. And then, people who really try and, I guess, just make the world a healthier, better place. So yeah.
I'll answer this really quick too. I think the person who like introduced me or like to wellness was when I came, like I was a freshman in college, and like one day, I would say like an advisor. So I'm part of like a first generation group cohort program. And his name was Emilio, and he saw me one day like super stressed and I don't know, just being me, a little freshman me. And he asked me, "What are you doing to work on your wellness?" I was like, "What is that?" Like, that I've never heard of that. Like, I've heard of self-care. I've never heard of what wellness is though. And he just like opened the doors for me. He like introduced me for the Center for Student Wellness. He like brought me so many resources, which I am really grateful for him. He just really, I don't know, he helped me a lot through college. And then also like Maya and Lindsay, of course, like being part of ACES has really brought in my like term of what wellness is, what I can do for myself and others. So yeah. Mhm.
Does anyone else have any questions for our panelists?
I just want to jump on and say thank you so much. This was so wonderful. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to sit on the panel and to Farah for moderating. Also wanted to shout out that it's Farah's birthday today. So she took time out of her exciting 21st, I believe. Yes, to sit on this panel. So, or to moderate the panel. So thank you, Farah.
Thanks everyone. Um, so do we have any last thoughts from our panelists? No, that's okay. I just want to.
We hope you have a fantastic 21st birthday.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for coming and joining us and being part of Wellness Fair this year. And also, I would just love to thank our panelists. You all shared some very insightful advice and provided a perspective that a lot of us are not used to hearing. And I just want to thank you all for taking the time to be here today. Wellness Fair is not over. You can head over to our website and I will drop the link in the chat, and you can participate in mindfulness and movement options such as meditation, a dance tutorial by the student group K-pop, and some yoga as well.
Great, thank you all. And this recording, along with yesterday's faculty and staff panel, will also be posted to our website, and our website will be live throughout next week. But be safe, everyone. Enjoy this premature snowy weather.
Yeah, thanks for, oh, sorry guys.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say thanks for organizing this. It was really awesome.
Yeah, thanks for coming. This was so fun. And again, thank you to the audience and our panelists.
All right, take care, everyone, and be safe. See ya.
Be warm. Bye.
Happy birthday, Farah.